Your big thing is give it up.
That's my big thing, Jon Snow. Give it up. It's a fund within Comic Relief to assist people with drug and alcohol problems in getting into abstinence-based recovery, to help them give it up, as it were. Hence the relevance of that punning moniker.
This idea of abstinence, which I think a lot of people do believe is the answer, are there enough outlets for that?
I think there's enough outlets. I think the problem, John, is funding and awareness, both of which Comic Relief and I are eager to address. I didn't know that not drinking and not taking drugs were an option. I know it sounds sort of obvious if you're not a person with addictive tendencies, but sort of from the onset of adulthood, drugs and alcohol were my way of just coping with the world. And I think increasingly it's seen less as an extreme problem and more, I mean, everyone knows someone that's got alcohol and drug issues somewhere in their lives or their family. And the purpose of this fund is to make sure those people can get the correct treatment, because I think the reason it's an unpopular cause, John, I imagine, is because the people that suffer from the illness are annoying to be around. This vomiting and
and people think they brought it on themselves.
I think there is an element of that, because it seemed like, you know, that there is some volition involved in lifting the wrists to the lips or plunging a syringe into the arm. But what precedes that, you know, neurologically, what precedes that biologically, and I suppose then you get into what is choice.
Let's look at what you looked like in those days.
All right. Quite sweet.
That's roughly you are a pretty boy. Pretty boy.
Yeah, I mean,
had you brought it on yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, sort of no one was forcing
me. And were you obnoxious?
Yeah, it was a really annoying little twerp. But I think that, but for me, drugs and alcohol were a solution to an emotional and perhaps even spiritual problem, a feeling literally of disease, unhappiness, inability to cope with life. And I think that when people stop using drugs and alcohol, they need another system or program of behaviour. And that's what we're hoping to give people access to, a different way of living, a different way of coping with the problems that lead to drugs and alcohol.
When you talk about abstinence, all these years on,
yeah,
do you still talk to yourself as somebody who abstains, or have you got through all that and you're just somebody who just doesn't drink and take drugs?
Even now, 10 years on, not drinking and not using drugs is a daily part of my life. Abstinence has to become an active component as using and drinking was. So yeah, I still have even in the negative, I still have a relationship with drugs and alcohol. It's still something that I consider. I still need the company and fellowship of other drug addicts and alcoholics. I still need that support, and I still need to give that support. That's where, like, there's a kind of, I don't know, there's sort of the altruistic element of abstinence is an important one. That's what I think. That's what the reason I got involved in this, John, was because when Amy Winehouse died, it was sort of such a predictable and obvious tragedy, and like everyone saw it coming, and I knew her, and I saw it coming, and it was regrettable, not just because of its sadness, not just because she was so talented, but because I think it was preventable. I think if she'd had access to the right information, if she'd had the right kind of support, that death could have been prevented. And I thought, like, well, it's a little late for all that now. So it made me wonder what positive action I could take. Had I not had access to abstinence-based recovery 10 years ago, I think, you know, I was told when I went into treatment that if I didn't stop taking drugs immediately, within 6 months I'd be dead, in prison, or in a lunatic asylum. And I think that there's so many people on the precipice of these terrible decisions.
Let's take you to Wembley, where your concert's going to be, your awareness-raising concert for Give It Up. What proportion of the people in the crowd do you think are still under the influence?
Well,
what
substantial percentage, 70%. I mean, like, young people.
So 70% of the people who will be listening to your concert will be there possibly needing to give it up.
Not necessarily, actually, John, because it's not a sort of a puritanical moral argument. I think that some people, perhaps you're among them, can safely take drugs and safely drink alcohol. It's not like no one should drink. It's not a puritanical Cromwellian argument against fun. It's like some people, clearly I was different. When I used to hang out with my mates and we used to drink and take drugs together, they'd all have a laugh. I'd go get arrested and beaten up, or like, you know, or like sort of start crying with my elbow through a window. You know, I'd break the window, not just putting it out of a window. That's relatively harmless. So I'm saying that some people have a tendency which needs to be arrested. Some people oughtn't take drugs or drink.
And when you talk about giving people an alternative world, in a way, to the one they've inhabited through
Yes.
drugs, did the drugs and the alcohol, in a sense, come with the territory that you were already on, which was as a public person already 10 years ago?
They came. I wasn't a public person when I started. I was like 16 years old.
No, but I mean, at the time you were really using heavily and felt you had to give up. It was part of another life, a life which, some part of which you still live. That in the public eye.
I don't see that. I don't see that as being a corollary. I think the reason that I took drugs and drank is the same reason that anyone that takes drugs and drinks to excess, was they're inside, they're unhappy. I'm not talking about recreational drug use or recreational drinking. That's none of my business. I'm talking about people that are doing it because there's pain inside them. The reason I did it is because I couldn't cope with life. I needed some kind of anaesthetic, and unless I have some methodology to replace that anaesthetic, drinking and taking drugs is my only solution.
Now, you said a lot of this to the select committee of MPs. How do you think your message went down? Do you think anyone was listening?
I wouldn't imagine so. I think those things are typically for display rather than function. But I think that there's increasing evidence that abstinence-based recovery is the most viable solution to the problem of addiction, and I think that that message is being received from elsewhere.
And you don't think that in terms of legalisation, that's the issue? What you want is medicalisation?
Yeah, I've never met a drug addict that cared about its legal status. I've never been with a drug addict who, what, this is illegal? Oh my God, I wish someone had told me. People are going to take drugs because they need to. So I think the criminal argument is almost redundant. The reason that it's problematic for me is because it enforces an attitude that it's a criminal behaviour as opposed to a health problem. So I think it's a psychological health-based issue, and if the criminal status would amend that attitude, then I'd be all for decriminalisation.
It seems still to be a very hard lesson to teach, because, for example, we had the chief of the Metropolitan Police this week saying companies should test everybody who comes to work.
I think it's very easy to vilify drug addicts and alcoholics, John, because, as we said, they're annoying people to be around, and it seems like there's an element of volition. But I think if you address it in your personal experience, if you think about sort of like when you've got a son or a mother or a sister that's got an addiction issue, it's clear that there's not a choice involved. The way that they're behaving, it's sort of very, very sad. And I think that this is an area where we need compassion and tolerance, not just because that's the human thing to do, but because that will help us to reach an appropriate solution.
Compassion and tolerance is not how the media treated you in those days, and possibly doesn't even treat you that way these days. And I'm wondering what you made of Leveson and the way in which people in public life have their private lives unravelled by tabloid media.
I think that, again, my attitude towards those inquiries is that the function that they fulfil is one of artifice and masquerade, as opposed to actually addressing any problem. But like press intrusion in the life of celebrities, it's like, given the state of the world, it's not a massive issue. But when it's like, you know, dead kids' phones, obviously that's sort of more substantial. I think that it's deeper than the media. I think that we don't like to...
Did you think of giving evidence to Leveson?
No one asked me, so no. But like, for me, these are institutionalised attitudes. You work in the media, John, so you know what it's about. People don't... The reason, I think it's because of a commercial corporate mentality. If you can only sell newspapers by stimulating people's baser primal motives, their sexuality, their prurience, their jealousy, their lust, then it's going to inform an attitude. So, like, you know, so I think that that's from the top down. People behave in a way that's indicative of those attitudes.
Do you sometimes think the price of fame is worth paying?
Not really. I mean, it's a ludicrous charade if you invest too heavily in it. You know, but as long as you acknowledge it as transient and meaningless, it doesn't have too much impact on you. And that's why when there's an opportunity to do something like give it up, you think, well, actually, that's going to help someone. there's some value to it. I suppose otherwise you might go insane if you take it seriously.
Have you got all the acts lined up for this concert?
There's brilliant people doing it. I mean, like Noel Gallagher, he's doing it, he's my friend. Noel Fielding, he's a wonderful comedian, he's doing it, he's my friend. Eddie Izzard, the brilliant Eddie Izzard, is doing it. And then sort of from the musical side, Noel Gallagher's not typically a comedian, but one could quarrel. There's like Paloma Faith and the young, like Jake Bugg, Rizzle Kicks, all these young people. There's people who...
So it's young people you're targeting?
Not really. I mean, say someone's 70 years old and they're smoking too much crack, I think they should knock it on the head. Unless they're really enjoying it and it's not a problem and they're not annoying down the Derby and Joan Club, in which case, go nuts.
When we talk about sort of life in the public eye, what do you make of Savile and everything that's unfolded from that?
Again, I think it speaks to the institutionalised attitude that we addressed a moment ago, that it must have been normalised, but I don't think that it should be another...
But is it still with us?
Well, yeah, I think people are paedophiles, aren't they? So
yeah,
that seems
people
to be
in public
happening.
life, people...
Presumably.
But presumably the culture of prevention is better than it was.
I suppose so, mate. I mean, just generally speaking, there's more awareness, there's less of a sort of tacit acceptance of prejudice and misogyny, and hopefully that reaches as far as paedophilia. But I don't know how one addresses such an enormous, toxic subject.
Now, I see from this that you've got some handsome tattoos. I've seen them in the flesh before now.
What do you clarify that, John?
What do you think about what do you think of the tattoo business? Weren't you beautiful enough without it?
Well, yes. I mean, from some perspectives, my mother would argue I was. But for me, I tell you what it's about.
Women and tattoos.
Oh, I don't mind what people do to their bodies, really, in the sanctuary of their own tattoo parlour. But for me, it's a representation of certain spiritual principles, and you know, it's not a grand subject, really. It's just a little bit of a laugh. I've got some beautiful things scribbled all over my body.
What about yoga?
Well, what that's all about, John, is, as you know, that consciousness is an amorphous and expanding entity. I think that we allow our consciousness to be prohibited by our senses, prescribed by our senses, living in the realm of these 5 apertures into our reality. But reality is limitless, space is infinite, time eternal. Through yoga, one can temporarily break the bonds that chain us to the mundane, the mondial, that which is of the earth. And we can temporarily at least, receive a taste of the infinite. This
has been a key to your recovery. You sound like a sort of New Age prophet, you know.
Prophet, you say?
Yes.
Jon Snow there just said that I sound like a New Age prophet.
Well...
Any particular one? Look at the beard, look at the hair.
Well, I spotted the Jesus Christ.
There it is. I'm out. It's not going to get any better than that. David Icke had to say it himself.
No, I mean, seriously, you speak in a way that, you know, high priests speak when you talk about, you know, the 5
apertures into reality, into the physical realm. Well, it's because it's there are certain
4
timeless...
Gospels, 5 apertures.
4 tops. Take that. There's 5
but
of them.
It has been absolutely structural to your own recovery.
I think it's integral to all of our lives. I think we elect to ignore the spiritual at our own, and it causes a deficit for ourselves and for our culture and for our planet. I think that we are too easy to identify ourselves as individuals. That idea is fortified daily through, as we said before, the stimulation of primal desires, that which anchor us to the self, and we ignore that we're here for such a short while, that we're all basically the same as one another, we're all connected to each other, and we have a collective responsibility.
And when you cast your eye across public life, who's most in need of yoga?
I think we all need to be having daily spiritual experiences. I suppose that you want to start with people in power because they're setting agendas and they're imposing ideas.
So if you ran the country, you'd have the cabinet out on their mats?
There would be mandatory meditation, necessary elevation, yoga daily. But it's not like some sort of Orwellian imposition. It'll be access to the infinite. Like, and no one should do anything they're not happy with. I spoke to Terry Gilliam once, you know him out of Monty Python. That person seems to have it flowing through him anyway. Or like say, you know, some people seem to be all right as they are. They're not hurting themselves, they're not hurting other people. I'm sort of, whether it's, you know, the give it up thing or yoga or meditation, I'm only addressing people who are dissatisfied and unhappy, and given the state of the world, it seems like that's a substantial number. I'm just saying there is a solution. If you don't want to drink or take drugs, you don't have to. If you
What
want to
would
have
you
a
say to those who said the solution is God? That's spiritual, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. It depends how they mean that word. As long as it's not some doctrinaire kosh bashing enlightenment out of people, as long as it's access to love. You know, when they analyse the semantics consistently through mythology and theology of words like love, God, they find that the common theme, John, is union, that we just want to be connected to something higher. That can be another person, that could be God, that could be a relationship with nature, it could even be a relationship with West Ham United. I think the important thing is to have as the central tenet of your being love, compassion and tolerance. Everyone knows that.
Russell Brand, thank you very much for talking to me.
Oh, I love talking to you.